Let me give you a little pop quiz real quick. Without thinking, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of violent, fashionable, seafaring roughnecks?
The Navy?
Well, okay, sure, I guess that works too. But what I was thinking about was... pirates! Long before the Industrial Revolution and airplane technology, boat travel was in its most basic of forms, and the main means of traveling across the ocean. If you wanted to survive as a sailor, you basically had to be a genius navigator, know how to manage the wind sails, and be courageous, ready for whatever the water throws at you. And if you weren't any of those things, you could always hire a knowledgeable crew and pretend you knew what you were doing. Among the fine sailors and pioneers that roamed the waters were pirates, known to us as the more lawless class within the seven seas. It's historically deduced that the golden age of piracy, where these scourges of the seas thrived the most, was between the second half of the 17th century and the first half of the 18th century. More recent than you thought, huh? Can you imagine the kind of gossip they would have had going around?
You know, I was in Salem the other day.
Lucky you. Was it us there?
Aye. 'Twas a bit smoky though, they were burning the witches.
Sorry, the what?
In any case, pirates have certainly left their mark on the world. Even in Hollywood and literature, they have their notable recognition. From the Black Lagoon and Pirates Cove to Captain Hook and Davy Jones, even as far back as Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. However, with this indoctrination into the limelight, there are certain qualities of the pirate that may have been altered or exaggerated to be favored more in a general audience. But how exactly do these pirates of pop culture differ from their historical counterparts? Well, that's what we're here to discuss. So saddle up your bootstraps, sailors, and join me as we set sail to uncover the truth behind these mysterious marauders of the briny blue. All aboard! First and foremost, to understand the basic concepts of changes in media, I feel like it's important to discuss a common drawback of fictional characters known as Flanderization. Popularized by Ned Flanders of The Simpsons, Flanderization describes a character's essential traits being exaggerated and oversimplified until they become that character's core personality. Say, for instance, if you have a strong brute with a big heart and a small brain, one or two of these traits may be held more in favor as they develop. In this case, strength and stupidity are usually the most common favorite for this type of character mold. So what does this have to do with pirates? Well, there's a couple different common tropes that pirates have in movies and other media, and I'll be going over a few of them to see just how historically accurate they really are. The first trope we're going to discuss is the most obvious one, the accent. You probably expect a pirate to talk in that typical "Yo-ho, me hearties, found the bowsprit, jive the boom jig" type of talk, like Mr. Krabs dialed up to 11. Although the accent is made up, it's surprisingly rooted in history. During the aforementioned Golden Age, and even before that, most common pirates were found in the Mediterranean and Caribbean seas, along with other surrounding portside areas. You could find pirates from the United Kingdom, France, Spain, Portugal, even Italy and Cuba, and those are just a few examples. Despite the inclusion of the Caribbean, though, the stereotypical pirate accent is derived more from the Mediterranean areas. Personally, if you ask me, it sounds like some form of Irish or Dutch, which isn't too far-fetched since they're in that general area. Now, you could argue that Sweden, Denmark, and Norway might also be part of that area, but that's leaning a bit more into Viking territory, which is a whole other can of worms. But I feel like it's worth mentioning they're pretty similar to pirates in most regards. The next common trope is outfits and appearances. Typically, you'd see most pirates on a crew being unkempt and wearing ragged clothing, most of them wearing rags on their heads. Meanwhile, the pirate captains would likely be in a bit more fancy dress, donning the big hat and coat and sporting a very sharp beard, or at least some form of facial hair. There is some historical accuracy to this, as most pirates came from poor and impoverished areas, or were forced into piracy by circumstance. The captains, thanks to their higher chain of command, could afford their luxury clothing, most wearing either canvas coats for heavy weather or silken velvet coats for style and flair. Usually they save their most fancy dress for special occasions, like shore leaves and executions. On the other hand, the typical captain's tricone hats were much less common. Pirates typically favored bandanas, wigs, and tighter, warmer hats for harsh weather conditions. The only reason some captains have a hat like this is most likely because they were former privateers, like Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard. You know, the pirate that comes to everyone's mind. There are more common commodities tethered to the pirate's appearance, but you'll probably be disappointed to hear about these next few. Hook hands, peg legs, eye patches. Yeah, you see them all the time, but they're not as common as you think. Sure, at that time, prosthetics made of wood pegs and metal hooks were pretty much all they had back then, but most of these usually came at low success rates and therefore weren't used often. So, if you had a limb cut off, you were basically sunk. Pun intended. Eye patches were also uncommon, but considering pirates could injure themselves on a regular basis, it's not too outlandish. That said, most pirates liked showing off their scars, as it was a symbol of their experience out on the high seas. What some pirates did carry, however, were silk sashes for carrying things in. You could say they were the original poster boys for the fanny pack. Our next point relates to the pirate's arsenal. Most media describes the pirates as being fans of big swords and big guns. And let me tell you, they were indeed waving their right to bear arms. Remember that silk sash I mentioned? Pirates would usually hold guns and tiny daggers in there. Ain't that a kick? The usual favorite pieces among pirates were flintlock pistols, muskets, and the blunderbuss. And as such, they made sure to carry gunpowder on them at all times. Although, it had to be watched very closely, as the tiniest bit of spilled gunpowder could have led to disaster in the midst of an attack. In the range of swords, while pirates did carry them, they weren't all big and fancy like most media would have you believe. Swords and blades in the pirate arsenal were typically smaller and shorter, easier for carrying around and handling. The most common pirate sword fitting this mold was known as a cutlass. And last, but certainly not least, the cannons! Always an essential part of pirate ship offense and defense, both in fiction and history. But it's worth noting that they weren't all big and powerful. Some pirate ships had smaller cannons purely to defend from intruding persons, and as such weren't designed for wrecking ships. If you try to shoot down a ship with that tiny pea shooter, you'd probably be laughed at, and probably shot down with a bigger cannon in response. Yes, sirree. Those pirates sure love their weapons. Anyway, on to the next point. What on earth is up with those parrots? In pop culture, a lot of pirate captains are seen with parrots on their shoulders, typically mimicking everything they say. Surprisingly, this isn't too far off from historical roots. Some pirates would keep small pets, normally to keep from being too bored on long trips. What were they supposed to do, watch the golf tournament? Not a chance. And since pirates usually traveled to exotic areas, a lot of them picked up birds to take care of, since they were perfectly low maintenance and good company. Of course, other small pets were somewhat standard, just not as common. Pets like cats, dogs, bunnies, even monkeys. So congratulations, Barbossa, you're historically certified! Now, speaking of the movies, this next one's a bit more oddly specific, so stay with me on this. In the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, Jack Sparrow is shown as having a permanent mark on his skin in the shape of a P, labeling him as a pirate for going against the Royal Order and freeing slaves from a trading ship. As far as I was able to look, this is mostly fiction. While branding and skin marking did exist in the golden age of piracy, as well as existing in letter form, it was typically reserved for slaves and criminal punishments. One could say Jack Sparrow falls under the criminal punishment category, but if you were a pirate in that time period, you most likely wouldn't be branded. Instead, you get a much worse punishments, most of which I don't think I can say here under contract. Let's just say the most leniency you'd get was life in prison. This leads into a big trope for the common pirates: crime. Typically, pirates are well known for pillaging, pilfering, and conquering things, meaning they basically took anything and anyone that could be of use to them. This is in fact historically accurate, and it had some kind of merit to it. As I mentioned earlier, most pirates derived from poverty and other poor conditions. Piracy just so happened to offer the promise of riches, food, and shelter, all in exchange for seaside servitude. It helped them survive and thrive, and also gave them a power hierarchy to look forward to. However, this wasn't exactly the case for all pirates. The French buccaneers in the 17th century started off hunting livestock before they set their sights on gold. As for innocent people captured by pirates, well, most think they'd be tortured in some way or another and end up walking the plank in the shark-infested waters. And you'd be half right. Torturing and other forms of debauchery were brought onto captives for either vengeance or pure entertainment, but they seldom ever walked the plank. In fact, the few instances of plank walking that were ever documented happened long after the golden age of piracy. Now, with all this in mind, how much does pop culture botch the historical accuracy of pirates? Considering a good amount of these tropes are historically accurate, I'd say most depictions of piracy do history justice. The Pirates of the Caribbean franchise is the best example I can think of that can properly portray the scourges of the sea in spite of its fictional Disney flair. Of course, there's a lot of other good examples and bad examples out there that I haven't covered, or don't even have the time to cover. And I sure ain't gonna make it through One Piece in one sitting. And sure, some flanderization and use of tropes can happen, but with enough research and development, I believe anyone can easily avoid making it too much of a problem. Does that mean they're necessarily a bad thing if they don't follow history? Not really. If you want to give a pirate a hook for a hand, go right ahead. It's not going to hurt anyone. Just make sure you know the difference between fact and fiction before your pirates get swept in the undertow. Well, that's all for now. What's your favorite piece of pirate media? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on our socials. This has been Vincent Fetterman with Smart Cookies. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time!
This program was produced by ZTV at the University of Akron. Do you want to gain experience in video production, professional social media, or working with real clients? Visit the UA School of Communications online or follow us on social media to learn more. ZTV, make media, make a difference.